Is Katie Kester, and I'm the city manager for the city and borough of Juneau. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. It is not the sunniest night we've had this summer, but it is not raining. So I appreciate that it's an extra sacrifice since we all have lots of things to do outside, not the least of which is preparing for an upcoming event. So upcoming Glacier Lake outburst flood. So I just want to acknowledge the anxiety and the very real nervousness and preparation that I certainly feel in my heart waiting for a Glacier Lake outburst flood, but I know each one of you in the audience who has lived through it, who has had their homes and their families impacted, is very much sitting in that space right now. And I just think it's important that we recognize that here we are a couple of weeks before an anticipated glacial lake outburst flood. However, tonight we are not here to talk about emergency preparedness. We're not here to talk about HESCO barriers and short-term mitigation solutions. We're really here to talk about the long-term solution, and that's why we've invited the Army Corps of Engineers, who have been our partner in both short-term mitigation and long-term solutions. However, you are all going to have lots of questions for us about all the things as you prepare your homes, as you worry about what the next month might come. So I just want to let you know that in addition to flood response and our website and our email address, we have people here representing all of those different CBJ emergency management, CBJ engineering, all of those different agencies, and they're going to be set up outside with information and tables so that you can go and ask them your questions and get your questions answered and have that dialogue. So I just want to take a moment to introduce those folks. We have CBJ Engineering here. If everyone could stand who's from CBJ Engineering. And they have a table where they have information on HESCO barriers, they have information on check valves, they have some of the inundation maps out there. So please ask these folks those questions. We also have Plinkett and Haida here. If Plinkett and Haida, Sabrina has been one of our partners in emergency preparedness, so they've got a lot of information on what's our plan for evacuation, where can we go, where do we park our cars, all of those types of questions. We also have the National Weather Service here. If you would please stand, I know I saw Aaron. There we go. And of course, these are Aaron and National Weather Service we depend on for the predictions. They can talk to you about the science. They can talk to you about the predictions. We have American Red Cross here. I saw Lauren. Lauren is a partner with the city and with Plinkett and Haida and the Red Cross on sheltering and those types of activities. So please, all of these people will be out here in the commons to ask those questions. But again, we're here not to talk about how we're going to make it through the next month, but we're here to talk about how we can truly, for the long term, fix this threat to our community, which is glacial lake outburst flood. So make it a long-term solution. I just want to express my deep appreciation and the Assembly's deep appreciation for the support from the delegation. We would not have these fine gentlemen here today if it weren't for Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan lobbying tirelessly for us and getting the over $4 million in the American Recovery Act so that they could start this work. We've had Senator Sullivan already organizing multiple high-level meetings with Army Corps, which I'm sure trickles down and really sends the message to our community how important this project is. And Congressman Begich has got us an appropriation that's working its way through the appropriation process to continue our mitigation efforts. So please, when you get a chance to thank the delegation and thank their staff, no, we couldn't do it without them, but really we couldn't do it without you guys communicating to our delegation how important this is to our community. And that's really why the Assembly has prioritized long-term solutions, has prioritized short-term mitigation. And I really think it's a testament to what we can do as a community when we come together and we all point towards one goal. All of that being said, this is the long-term solution is a United States Army Corps of Engineers project on U.S. Forest Service land. So our role as the City and Borough of Juneau is to advocate for funding, to be a community partner, to give them the tools that they need. But really, this group right here is the group that's going to be in charge of researching it and finding that solution. So I just want to extend a huge thank you to the Army Corps. Not only has this team been engaged with us for a long-term solution, but we've had also the flood fighting team engaged with us for the HESCO barriers and the short-term mitigation. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Lee Haynes, who will then introduce his team.
All right. Thank you very much, Kate. I appreciate the introduction. And so I'm going to do some quick introductions here. I'm Lee Haynes. I'm the section chief of the Civil Works Project Management section at the U.S. Corps of Engineers. Civil Works program, our mission is really flood risk mitigation and navigation. So that's what that boils down to is flood type projects and harbors. That's what we do. And I'm going to kind of go along the line here. Mike references over immediately to my right. Mike is the tech lead for this study we're conducting right now. A lot of you may have met him or talked to him at some point during the HESCO baskets. He's been involved in that project too. And his role is really to drive the engineering. Next down is Curtis Lee. He's the project manager for this technical study, really organizing and keeping all the pieces moving and playing that three-dimensional chess of like, I have to do this, I have to do this. How do I get all the pieces to move succinctly so we can go quickly, fast, efficiently to get us to an end result? The next one down is Erin Stockdale. She's the Alaska District's Chief of Planning. That role is all about planning. How do we plan for the future? How do we plan to build these things in a way that's safe, reliable, that performs for the long term? This, a long-term solution needs to be just that. So I'm going to kind of dive in through here. I have about 10 slides with a PowerPoint that I think is probably going to address many of those questions that folks may have, sort of off the top. And then I want this to be a discussion. There's a lot of folks in this room. So I'm going to kind of attack the questions that I think are probably first and foremost on your mind, but I might not get to some of them or understand all of them. So, I want to leave a lot of time for discussion and additional questions to really help folks understand what this long-term project may be, what it's going to look like, how we're going to get there, and go through those things. So I'm going to kind of just jump right into this and we'll go for there. And towards the end, if we do have, I want to leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm Lee Haynes. I have this slide deck here. Gonna run through it. Want to kind of point one thing out on the just opening page here. Corps of Engineers is celebrating its 250th anniversary. We've been around for a long time. Ever since George Washington created us as an agency to build things for the Continental Army a long, long time ago. Corps of Engineers has been involved in what's currently called flood risk reduction studies, flood risk mitigation, since about the 1830s. Kind of as an agency, this is one of these things that we do. We've been doing it for quite some time. So kind of things I want to really go through tonight. Introduce gloss. You guys have lived these, you know what they are. We're just going to kind of introduce them real quick to just make sure that everyone's on the same page. What the Corps of Engineers, the USACE process is, what this technical study report that we have $4.75 million to do, what we're going to do with that, how it's going to lead to a long-term solution, some way to mitigate the damage from the Guelph floods. And then we're going to kind of cover what's in that report, what are we studying, what's the science behind this, what science are we creating. Then we're going to kind of dive into the data needs, the analysis that's going to be conducted, who's helping do that, and then the next steps, what you'll see as a community, when you see folks down here collecting that data, doing analysis. Some of it's boots on the ground science, some of it's done in computer model simulations in a laboratory somewhere. So gloss, right? Glacial outburst floods in Icelandic, I think it's Jokelet, but I've probably butchered that. I don't know how to speak Icelandic. they happen all over the world. They're driven by glacial terrain. It's kind of a combination of geology, glaciology, topography. And when those intersect in a bad way, glacial lakes can form, and as those glacial lakes, like Suicide Basin, fill up, at some point, they overcome those internal forces in the ice, and they release, and they let go catastrophically. And you'll see sort of I'm trying to think. And so you'll see sort of a curve building up as that water percolates its way through the glacier. It's opening up new channels within the glacier, and it drains out a lake, and at some point it reaches a capacity or drains the lake, and a steep drop off. Primarily because the systems run out of water to do anything with. In the case of Juneau, as many of you know, the Suicide Basin is the lake that is filling up, really driving the water is stored there until some point in which it overcomes the internal ice forces, and then flows through the glacier, under the glacier, into Mendenhall Lake, and ultimately to the Mendenhall River, where it causes damage. And then within the Mendenhall Glacier, there's another basin further upstream that it's still very ice covered. But one of our questions is, what does that look like in 50 years? If this is a long-term solution, we need to take a very systematic approach to this, and understand all of the risks there, as we kind of work through this study. So I'm going to sort of dive into the USACE process really quickly. As a federal agency, we're kind of a unique animal, unique beast. So USACE, it's a project-funded organization. What that really boils down to is we're funded by the project or to do a project, whatever they may be, generally at the congressional level. A lot of agencies sort of are given a big pot of money to do with as that agency sees fit. We at the Corps of Engineers are generally funded down to the project level. Sort of Corps of Engineers, go do this thing. So all of our projects need both an authorization and an allocation. The best example I've ever heard of this is, it's kind of like when you go and ask your mom or you go ask to go see the movies from your parents, right? Your dad tells you, yes, you can go see the movies. Then you have to go ask mom and say, can I have $20 to go see the movies? You need both those things. You need the permission to go, you need the money to go. And that's kind of how that works on a really high level. And then we've got a lot of programs. USACE is an agency, obviously, we're the Army Corps of Engineers. We build things for the military, runways, barracks, those sorts of military infrastructure. But within the Civil Works branch, that's where we do we do navigation things, which is harbors, which obviously isn't to the point here. And we do a whole lot of flood risk reduction type projects. Do them across the state, do them across the nation, and pull along or have access to really experts from across the nation to look into these things. So within that, what we're looking at here is sort of this, you may see this term floating around in the GI study or general investigation study. What is that? What is kind of the process? So generally it's, once Congress gives us that approval, that allocation of funding, we move into this study process, and that study is called a feasibility study. What that really is, what are we studying there? We're looking at what should be built, what benefits does it provide, how do we justify that project? Is it a good project? Does it do the things that it is supposed to do? Whether that's, stop, prevent flooding, reduce the risk of a flood, protect infrastructure. And at the end of that, you sort of identify this is the solution we want to build, construct, do something with. You've completed your NEPA documentation. You sort of understand that solution. You understand its benefits, its potential negatives. You've done sort of a trade-off analysis and really understood what that solution may be. And then that ends in what's called a chief's report. What that really is it's a recommendation to Congress that says the Corps of Engineers as an agency recommends that Congress authorize and allocate funds for this project. Once Congress provides those funds and allocation, we dive into the design phase. Where that really is, that's where the heart of the engineering happens. You may know what we're gonna build. We haven't necessarily designed it down to the design that a construction contractor needs, right? So the end of design phase, those are blueprints you can hand off to a construction contractor and say, build me this. And put those out to bid. I mean, it really ends at sort of the construction contract bidding phase. And then you move into construction, and that can take depends on the scale of the project. It can take years, it can take months. It's what you're gonna build is gonna be driven by that time. There's some general timelines here. Kind of wanted to point out, you know, we've at the Alaska District, we've seen these timelines, we've been a part of them, right? A great example up in Borough, there is a large erosion issue up there. They're losing about 10 feet of coastline per year, keeps eroding the town of Barrow. So in tail end of 2017, beginning of 2018, we began a feasibility study there, studying what should be built, what should be done about this. That wrapped up with a chief's report at the tail end of 2019. And in 2020, we began designing a project, awarded a construction contract in 2024. And the first rocks, the construction is ongoing. They are shipping material from Nome as we speak to Ukiaba to construct this. So this is a reasonable timeline. It's a fast, but it's an achievable timeline. We do look for ways to go faster, save time, get us there quicker, but from sort of where we are today to physical construction is multiple years, you know, 6, 7, 10-ish years is not a reasonable timeline. I'm gonna kind of dive into where we are today. So, you know, a lot of these phases, a lot of times kind of that we do need that congressional funding, that congressional approval to really get going. We got that, and this technical study has been authorized and approved, and we're charging into it. What that really is that a lot of times projects are authorized on a 2-year cycle or a 3-year cycle. Most projects aren't desperately urgent. We understand this one's desperately urgent. And so we're starting this technical study to really supplement a GI study plan, right? The idea is if we start doing data analysis and we start deciding what is the solution we want to really push forward on, and we have all the data that we would have to collect during a GI study already at our fingertips, that makes that study go lickety split. So that's engineering data, that's economic data, all of those that drive this. It makes it go quick. And so this is sort of in lieu of the beginning parts of a feasibility study. We're starting down that path today, and really trying to go as quickly as we can to get to a long-term permanent solution. So kind of what are we studying, right? You know, the biggest question out there for us is really how much water do we need to mitigate for? What's a theoretical maximum of the amount of water that could be in Suicide Basin? What about the basin further ablation? At what timeline are they going to go? What happens if there's an atmospheric river and it's raining heavily in Juneau when the glacial outburst occurs? We need to be considering all of these sort of compounding factors, if you will, as we get to that final design curve, or that final design sort of elevate level of water or amount of water. And then we have to look, if this is a long-term solution, it needs to last for a long time. So we need to sit here and think, what does it look like in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years out? What amount of water do we need to deal with and have a plan to mitigate the risk from? And that's what ultimately drives our design flood event. It helps us really inform what solutions are even viable. As we start looking through that, we'll say, well, you can't even build this because you can't build it big enough, or this solution won't work because of this. and you start weeding out potential solutions. The next piece of this is, where does the water go? We really evaluate this in terms of risk. And so if the water doesn't get a portion of town wet, it's not at risk. We also have to be very considerate or conscientious that we don't transfer risk, right? If you build a solution in one place, and that ultimately just pushes the risk down a river, that's not a very good solution. But it's not a solution at all. We have to be cognizant of what those potential solutions sort of bring and how they can potentially go wrong. They need fail safes built into them. You know, the end of Mendenhall, what's holding Mendenhall Lake in place is a glacial moraine. Those are notoriously full of void spaces. They're whatever jumbled up rocks were left behind by the glacier. You know, what's underneath them? I don't think we really know. You know, we want to do a lot of geotechnical drilling and analysis to figure out what's stable, what can we build on, what's going to hold water, what's never going to hold water. Within this, we're doing a whole lot of baseline data and analysis, sort of an environmental baseline. At some point, we'll have to go through the NEPA process. The NEPA process is a whole lot faster if you have all of your baseline data laid out and you understand what the sort of the null state is. We also have to do a lot of economic analysis. What that really drives and gets into is what is, it's partly justification, but it's also how big do we go? In terms of buying down risk, there's a lot of benefits to this. We can look at the benefits of reduced flooding impacts, not having to storm fight, the benefits of not losing entire communities, and you sort of calculate up those damages of where they're going to be. But there's going to be trade-offs. If we build something large up on Mendenhall Lake, what are the trade-offs? You know, we need to consider those and really think through what's the trade-off. And so when you boil down an economic analysis, half of it is what benefits does this project bring, but what are the trade-offs? And the simplest way to do that is to try to put those into monetary terms. There's some things that you just can't put into monetary terms. And you can do qualitative sort of analysis of them. But that economic analysis really drives, you know, what as a community is Juneau giving up, you know, in terms of money, time, whatever. What as a community is Juneau receiving in terms of risk reduction, not having, you know, safety and security. That's boils into the economic analysis. And I kind of touched on the drilling. You know, we want to figure out, where is it stable to build? Where can we build a long-term solution? And it really boils down into risk analysis of, you know, we at the Corps of Engineers really want to make sure and understand that we're not transferring risk from one group of people to another group of people. You know, we save a neighborhood by pushing water into another neighborhood. That's not an acceptable solution. And how do we reduce risk to the entire community? So sort of the end point of this analysis is it gives us a zero mark to start from and evaluate solutions, right? So that's sort of a future without project scenario. That's our zero mark. From that point, if you say, hey, we don't build anything, you can then evaluate those solutions against not building anything and really see what comes out and how big you should go. At what point have you brought that risk down to a tolerable point? And it needs to be a system-wide analysis. We have to look beyond just Suicide Basin. We have to look sort of beyond the immediate impacts of the Mendenhall River to sort of the Mendenhall Valley, the entire Mendenhall Glacier. We don't want to put the blinders on. We want to do a complete analysis. So kind of where are we going? We've sort of set this. This is a very cut down, simplified version of a flow chart we've made in the office that has about 50 of these boxes, and the arrows even loop back onto each other, and it's confusing as heck, right? So, you know, kind of big. This is kind of a big picture, simplified thing. But what are we doing, right? We're figuring out all of the things that people already know. We don't want to recreate the wheel. If someone has data, we just want to scoop that data up and run with it. If someone has a hydrologic model, Michael Baker has a hydrological model that they've done for a lot of the HESCO baskets. We don't need to recreate the wheel. We want to scoop theirs up and run with it. Open up the hood, look at the guts of that model, improve it if we want to, if it's already beautiful. Hey, just keep using that. So we're kind of scooping up the data. We're putting out water level sensors. You may have seen Mike here. He's been working till 9 o'clock at night, every night for the last 3 or 4 days. Putting water level sensors out to capture this year's flood event. What does that do? It gives us a surety that our model is complete and actually models things correctly. If you can't model a node event and sort of recreate within a computer what happened in 2024, what happens in 2025, you can't trust your model. So we need to be able to trust that the model is able to reproduce what's happened previously, so then we can really truly evaluate the solutions. We're combing through all of the geotechnical data that's sort of ever been produced in the Mendenhall Valley, trying to understand what is the subsurface conditions out there. And we're starting in on some of the environmental data collection and starting to collect some data to drive those economic analyses. So kind of who's involved, right? You hear Army Corps of Engineers, and we're involved. The Army Corps of Engineers has 30-some thousand employees across the nation. One of our benefits or strengths really is we can reach out. There's experts all over the country on different things. We've been discussing, where can we get an ice expert? And once, maybe we can go to Antarctica. There's an ice expert in Antarctica we can get a hold of. Where can we get a hold of experts into flood modeling? We tap into those experts and sort of run them from a team in Alaska that really understands. A lot of us either live in Alaska in some place, or we're located in Anchorage. And there's folks in our office that grew up in Juneau. They know this community, they love this community. Their parents, their friends, family may live down here. And then beyond USACE, obviously the Forest Service is involved. The Mendenhall Glacier, Mendenhall Lake is there. The USGS is helping out there. They're helping us deploy water level sensors. They're helping with a lot of the monitoring of the glacier. UAS is doing a lot of glacial studies. I was talking to Aaron the other day. They've got plans to help really understand the glaciology and the subsurface of that glacier. Weather Service, with Aaron out there, his modeling is really helping us drive how much water do we need to be concerned about. Our partners at CBJ are wonderful. They have a lot of engineering analysis. Obviously, they've been in the engineering department at CBJ is doing a wonderful job. They've engineered your roads, your power systems, your storm drains, all of those things. We want to grab their data and work with them to kind of understand how do we mitigate for these events in the long term. DOT controls some of those bridges out there. We want to make sure that bridges are often choke points, that we understand those. And Click and Hide is, beneficial to this. They're running a lot of risk management, and they're helping us understand the community. So next steps. We're putting in a water data loggers, water sensors. We want to make sure that we get the best science we possibly can out of this year's event. And next year's event, that's really going to help validate these models and make so that we can trust them, so that we can make decisions off of what we model. This fall, there's going to be an economics team that is going to be in the community starting to gather field data and really understand the economics behind this. Throughout the fall, there's going to be some additional survey LiDAR data is ongoing. And we're spinning up, starting to produce those models so we can really evaluate solutions and model the potential impacts of what things look like. So that's my 10-slide spiel. I told you I'd try to keep it short and leave time for questions, comments, discussion. I think a lot of you have found it. We at the Army Corps of Engineers have added to our website, where we're publishing information. That's really gonna be the first stop shop of where you can get information from the Corps of Engineers regarding this project. The QR code to the website along with its link. And I tried on my own computer. If you Google Civil Works Mendenhall Valley Technical Report, I think Google should get you there. And kind of want to, highlight that out as we have things to share. We're going to be publishing them on our website and really bringing out. This is conclusions we've gotten to. This is where we are in the study. These are things we found out. With that, like I said, I want to have a discussion with people. I don't want to just lecture and talk to people for an hour, 2 hours. That's way too much. I'd be hoarse. So I think I'll open it up for questions. I don't know how you guys normally run these, but we can fire away. Yep, go ahead. Oh. I think you wanted to say something. I'll pass to her and then we'll.
I just want to have people use this mic here so that everyone can hear you. And if you so if you could just come and kind of queue up behind this mic, that would be super helpful.
Right. So my question is, based on all this data and analysis from all these different sources, has there been any discussions based on this data? What would be the long-term solution to prevent flood, prevent disaster? We have enough data, has it been discussed? What could be a long-term solution?
Yep, I'm gonna kind of dive into these. It's probably a question that's run through a lot of your minds. And so there's really a few ways to mitigate for flooding. The first way is really to increase the hydraulic capacity of the system. What are those types of solutions? Those are things like bypass channels, channelizing, putting a channel, a safe corridor, a safe place for all that water to go where it doesn't cause damages. That type of solution, those increased hydraulic capacity solutions, that's essentially what the HESCO baskets do. Obviously they're not permanent, but that's that idea of we're going to move all the water down safely without it going into homes. Another type of solution is really retain and release. So that gets into, all right, all this water comes down. It comes down too fast for it to safely flow to the ocean. So retain it somewhere. We don't know whether that's Mendenhall Lake, whether that's some other in Suicide Basin, but retain that water and slowly release it over time in such a way that it doesn't flood. The kind of the other possibility out there, type of solution that's on the table, is eliminate the problem at the source. That's essentially, you could do it through pumps, you could do it through a tunnel, but drain Suicide Basin before it goes through the glacier. All of those are options as far as where we really do not know. As far as how big they are, we don't know. That's part of what this study is to do. And understand some of those may fall out as we kind of study. We might say, this is just untenable. This is not a thing we can do. It just won't work. And some of them may begin to be glowing. But as far as where are we in this process of knowing what's the best one, we really don't know yet. And that's what we're studying.
To expand on that third option.
Yep. So the idea is kind of lake taps. You can do it with pumps. You can do it with lake taps. There's different ways to do it, but the idea would be drain Suicide Basin before it breaks through the ice and flows down into the community. Similarly, there's hydro lake taps that people have put in throughout Southeast Alaska. There's one was about 40 miles south of here. Where people have drilled into a lake through a mountain, and they've tapped that lake to use it for hydropower. Similar concept. The hydropower here is probably kind of irrelevant. But if you drill a hole into Suicide Basin and let that water trickle out, it wouldn't flood anymore. You would just sort of, over the course of the summer, as much water is going into Suicide Basin, would be coming back on a drain.
You got my help.
So what I heard is probably optimistically 6 years before we have some, five years to do the studies and the construction need more. So that's sort of a beginning point. And then where are you on the technical study? How long do you expect that to take?
So we started the technical study. We're scheduling it out for potentially up to 3 years, and that's really if there's a last summer of data gathering that needs to happen. The real goal is that the brunt of that analysis takes place through this fall, tail end of this summer, with a lot of data gathering next summer, and then finalizing it potentially that last, I guess that'd be summer of 27 being, if it's necessary, the final field collection, data collection effort before we publish and finalize that report. And kind of the goal here is to really augment, feed that GI study process so that we're not starting at square one, we're starting well along the way. And not make it, basically not make it take long, but make the whole process go faster and shorter.
2 questions. You mentioned there's a second basin further up the glacier. If you have any more data on that to share with us. And then the other question, can you clarify kind of where in that congressional approval you are, in the sense like you have approval to gather data, you have funding, after the data is gathered, you have to go back for congressional approval to actually like pour the concrete boots on the ground. So are we at risk of being denied even after the data is gathered? That makes sense.
Yep, I'll go slightly out of order, then I'll pass the
Yeah.
mic here. So on the core as an entity, where are we in the process, right? So we have the approval, we have the funding to do the feasibility or this technical study that then feeds a feasibility report. And that's what we're driving down that path as fast as we can right now. Congress being Congress, they can always do other things, but generally we would then need approval to do the feasibility study. And these are large scale solutions. They range in the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. Kind of as an example, within the city of Seward, the Corps of Engineers, there's a tunnel through a mountain that the Corps of Engineers built that's being rehabbed, rebuilt to bring it up to modern safety standards. The current estimated project cost of that is about $350 million. So when we sort of discuss a tunneling option, we're into the hundreds of millions of dollars. I mentioned the Barrow project earlier. That's a $500 million 5-mile coastal revetment, coastal erosion protection structure. So many of these things are into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And we're, in order to get those hundreds of millions of dollars, we are going to have to go out to Congress and have those approved at some point. I'm going to let Mike kind of take a talk on the further up the glacier.
Yeah, so I think that second question about potential basins farther up in Mendenhall Glacier. There's one that stands out that's on the west side of Mendenhall Glacier, about 2.5 miles up, and then there are potentially more above that. It's unknown at this time. This goes back into that slide that Leif was showing, looking at all the different agencies that we're working with, and really our goal of leveraging all of the people that are involved and all these smart people, all these smart agencies. And so Alaska DNR, Department of Natural Resources, is doing ground penetrating radar on the glacier. They did some this summer that's being processed, and they have more to come. They will move up the glacier and is going to look at that basin. So that is one of my priorities is coordinating with them to prioritize getting that upper basin delineated to see if that basin is over deepened like Suicide Basin. Or if it's, you can't see from the surface, you can just see the surface shape. But that'll be a priority, is working with those teams as soon as possible to identify if that is another basin that could fill up, and maybe call it Suicide Basin 2 or something like that.
Yeah, I just throw in there too, this kind of highlights the importance of gathering the full body of data that we need, because things like that are really going to play into the planning process that, that would change. The condition would be a lot different, we're looking at, this type of thing happening over, the next 75 years or, just want to throw that out there. That kind of just highlights the importance of, of gathering the complete body of data to make a decision.
So you're thinking,
Let's let her go since she hasn't mentioned it yet.
the glacier moves 2.5 feet a day. So drilling through it and putting a pipe through it, how is that going to work?
Yep, so the idea here is ground penetrating radar. You would essentially shoot radar through the glacier. When that hits hard bedrock, the radar is going to bounce back up, similar to the radars bounce off planes. And that shows you where the ice ends and the rock starts. That's under the glacier somewhere. I don't know that we'll ever drill the glacier or be able to drill the glacier. People have done it, but I don't know that we need to do that. There's other methods to get that data.
You hear me? Okay. I've been looking at the images that are available at Suicide Glacier on the web. And it looks to me like there would be a possibility of blasting rock off the west side of Suicide Basin and building a permanent dam on that end to retain the water in Suicide Basin. And it might come out, it would eventually come out anyway, but it would be a controlled release. So you're basically using the basin itself as a controlled release reservoir. So have you considered that option of filling that end of the Suicide Basin with rock rubble that you can blast off the top and just fall in place?
Really haven't considered it. The glacier dynamics themselves. Glaciers are big things. They have to move a lot of rocks. We would have to stabilize the glacier to do that. I don't know that it's really possible. It's worth considering, but I think at this time I don't know that it's really possible. Controlling the water at Suicide Basin itself leaves the problem. If you build something in Suicide Basin, somebody has to go up there and maintain it. Somebody has to go up there and operate it. And that can be somewhat challenging and problematic to access as a primary point of maintenance or operation.
If we had the same flow as last year, God bless the people that were inundated, but now it's going to get pushed down. I'm on the other side of the Brotherhood Bridge. And people on, the first street, they pretty much got flooded. I'm on the second street. So what are your expectations for a greater flow downstream?
So CBJ out in the atrium has some flood maps, but with HESCO baskets, without HESCO baskets, they're probably the best source for what we anticipate or what's anticipated for this year's event when it does come. I gotta kind of defer you to CBJ and so the work that they've already put in on that.
So one other thing I will add is the modeling firm, Michael Baker, that was hired to look at the impacts of HESCOs on the river corridor as a whole. particularly the modeler who left that effort is basically a national expert, and so, you know, like other agencies, leads at other agencies, when they hear his name, they all feel like he is the person to work on it, so. We were really glad that Michael Baker and Mark McBroom, who is leading that effort, are the people that are doing that modeling.
So when I look at that model, it is as up to date as it can possibly be right now.
They are continuing to update that model as we speak with new information.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, to the best of my knowledge, and maybe you can correct me, I don't believe Michael Baker's group has done any new cross sections on that river. They're using all old cross sections. And that river changes dynamically, I mean dramatically, every time we have one of these events. So there's increased down cutting, we see the rocks falling, you know, the armor rock that's been placed before falling into the river. We know that the river gets a little wider and it gets a little deeper with every one of these events that goes on. So we're not, some of us don't have a lot of confidence in that last model we did. Perhaps it's good enough. Perhaps that actually works in our favor, because if the channel volume has actually increased, maybe their model is smaller than what the river can actually handle. So we could hope that the error works in that direction, not the other. But the couple of things I'd like to point out is, one, I'm hoping that you've already, in your own minds, have done the alternatives analysis and realized that anything we do at Suicide Basin is probably not the correct thing to do, because it doesn't address future basins. And most of those alternatives that people are talking about are fraught with peril. We have an unknown type of rock in the mountain there. Pumping is not feasible. Maintaining pumps and getting fuel to them, I mean, it's just not workable. Blasting the rock, that's something else. So it sounds like you're kind of moving towards an attenuation, because we know the river can handle 17,000 CFS. It can't handle the 42,000 CFS that came down last year. It's going to be nothing but devastating destruction every time we have one of these events if we try and increase the amount of water that's going down the river. So it sounds like attenuation is the answer. And you talked about some things to consider with that, and you talked about what would Juneau give up, and Juneau would not be giving up anything. The Forest Service has already agreed that that would be a great project, that if you put a dry dam across the outlet of the lake, it would serve as the pedestrian bridge they have in their future plans. They want a bridge across the lake. They want an elevated walking trail around Dredge Lake. So if you put a levee all the way around Dredge Lake, you could impound more than enough water for any release that came out of Suicide Basin and let it release at a rate that the river would handle. And you're worried about what the economic benefits are. Well, we've already learned from the assessor that there's $1.5 billion worth of residential structures alone, no land values. And that doesn't include, that's just on the west side or the east side of the river. That doesn't include anything on the other side. That doesn't include the airport area. We've come up with a regional analysis of about $5 billion worth of potential destruction if there was a massive release of Suicide Basin. So when we talk about a cost benefit analysis, I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. So I guess where I'm going with all this is, I'm wondering, why can't we expedite this process? Why can't we just take what's there? We know that a level model has already been done. A level model has already been done for Suicide Basin release and what can go down the river. We already know that we can impound enough acre feet of water to do the trick. So how it has to be built, yeah, we submitted a white paper on what we think should be built. We're not hung on a model, we're not hung on a design. We just think that we know that basic premise is probably the likable solution and the probable one, and most experts agree with us. So we're wondering, is there any way you can expedite this process, identify how big that area would have to be, get some drilling done ASAP, find out what the subsurface is like, find out what you've got to build on, and then figure out how to build it, because we can't wait 7 years. We just can't.
I think, yes, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the goal of this technical study is to get us there. To find a way to expedite. Like I said, options may fall off the table as we kind of do this sort of analysis, right? The from my perspective, one of the biggest fears, one of the biggest things that we have to make sure what we do. In the event that something's built on Mendenhall Lake. To retain that water, release it slowly. It's a dam type structure. It cannot fail. And I say that in a way where you take all that water in Suicide Basin, you put it in Mendenhall Lake, stack it up behind a dam. In the event that dam doesn't perform perfectly. Now instead of that water being released over 48-hour period, whatever it may be, a long time, that water is released over 2, 3, 4-hour period. It's not that it's an impossible solution, right? But it needs to be spot on. It does induce, or it doesn't induce risk, but there's a risk factor that comes with a dam, right? You drive around town, there's all the dam break signs that say dam break evacuation for other creeks. You know, it's not that it can't be done, right? I mean, USACE has built a lot of dams. But it also cannot fail. And that's a high engineering bar to overcome, and it needs to be thought through.
I'll also add that I understand that this 7-year timeline is alarming, and that means 4, 5, 6, 7 years of destruction and turmoil and stress. I do want to point out that this technical study being deployed before a GI is it's unheard of. I've never heard of it. It was a big surprise to us when we got them nearly $5 million to even start gathering data. So I will say that the agency, our leaders do recognize the dire need for this project, and they responded by going outside of our normal process to help us kickstart this study. It isn't fast enough, I do know that, but I will say, like, we have an incredible sponsor working with us here. They've done the legwork to get this funding up front, and I don't know what our administration is going to do next, but it isn't unheard of for these types of things to be expedited even more, but we do have a process within which we have to work. And this is a unique rollout that recognizes the urgency of the issue.
Mentioned having 4.75 million in funding. And so how long does that funding last? And if you could just talk a little bit about the project cycle. You talked about the study you're doing now and then a feasibility study. You mentioned that 2027 could be the last year collecting data. And then how long does it take to kind of process that data and come out with the next steps? So if you could just talk about the funding and the timeline, please.
Yep, so that $4.75 million, that is disaster relief supplemental money, in weird budgetary government things. It's non-expiring funds. They're there to help used up. The goal is to use them as fast as quickly, right? Because we want answers, not money sitting in the bank account. There's no way to go. So we want to get out and get that data collected, run the analysis. And so that's kind of the I guess plus side. The good thing is it's 100% federal funding. It's not many Corps of Engineers projects are cost shared in some manner. This is not. It's just funding from 100% federal funding. The next sort of steps moving into this study process. I never want to. I don't want to speak for the CODEL level, right? The congressional delegation can do what they will. Congress as an entity can do what they will. Stranger things have happened. Congress has said 4 years just to build this. It's not unheard of. It's a rare thing, but it's not unheard of. Hopefully that gets to your question.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have to be spot on with building this dry dam. But we've got all our eggs in one basket now at the HESCO barriers. What happens if that water backs up fully behind them and we have a breach of those barriers? We've got the same thing at the dam station. You'll have a huge volume of water bursting through our neighborhood again. And I want to go back to the last suggestion I made about blasting a dam across Suicide Basin. There are thousands of examples around the world where landslides have come down across the river basin and created a permanent lake. That's not something you'd have to maintain. That could be done, and it could, if you could do a study to legitimize that option.
So that is, I think it's a really good point to look at Suicide Basin and managing the water at the source. The thing that jumps out is, one thing that jumps out is that there's a steady stream of water coming to Suicide Basin. So you do have to manage more and more water coming in, and kind of one version of what you're describing would be something like a lake tap, or just continuously draining that basin instead of impounding it. You're right, there are landslides all around the world that have impounded bodies of water and created lakes. That is also an example of why you can't rush into it. So there's another project kind of like this on Mount St. Helens, where a landslide from the Mount St. Helens eruption dammed the lake and then basically created the risk of debris flows downstream in all those communities. And because that exists, they had to put a lake tap through there, which they now continually maintain. And it is a huge, overwhelming financial responsibility for the Forest Service there. So that is, and you know, whether it's the Forest Service or whoever it is who is the manager, I'm not saying it's the Forest Service in that case, they're just the ones who are doing it there. But the point is that impounding water comes with its own risks and long-term management costs. And that's why that needs to be thoroughly reviewed as to the best way that that could be an alternative solution.
I'm way up here at the top. Thank you for the QR code that we put on the page that will give us information. That's a really good first step in letting us kind of know what's happening. I appreciate that. Can you speak to or explain or help me understand where the cost benefit analysis takes place in all of this study? Maybe if you can answer that, then I can tell you where I'm going with this.
Yep, so the cost benefit analysis really drives, it's obviously you have to have solutions sort of figured out and thought out well enough to understand how much they will cost. And then you compare them to the benefits, right? So, you know, as we touched on, I mean, there are a lot of benefits. And at some point, all you need is enough benefits to show that, hey, this is a justifiable project. But you also want to understand at what point do you stop buying down risk, right? At what point have you gotten big enough and sufficiently bought enough risk reduction, enough protection, if you will? The building more just really doesn't make sense.
So it was explained to me, and it could be, maybe you can correct it, and I hadn't thought of this, I didn't realize that once you come up with an idea of what you think you want to do after all the technical studies and you do the cost benefit analysis, then it's a determination whether CBJ can afford it or it's manageable for them. And if it's not, then am I correct? And it's something that the Corps would determine whether it's a project that they can fund or the congressional delegation will fund and manage. And if that's not possible, the project might not happen. I was just trying to get a realistic view of what could be, because it's easy to see the money for the investigation and think, okay, we just have to get through this and then it's going to happen. But the message I kind of got when I heard that was that it's, you know, it's really not necessarily a done deal because it's a pretty expensive project. Did I get that wrong or explain that wrong?
So I think, so the cost benefit analysis really drives those trade-off analysis. It's part of that trade-off analysis, right? You're really trying to get to at what point have we bought a sufficiently large project. You know, until the money's there, honestly, you know, there's no necessary, you know, silver bullet, right? Until Congress doesn't appropriate funds for construction, obviously Congress can do what Congress will. And I don't want to speak for them. But I do think there's a lot of motivation, if you will, Congress has been doing, the best job, or the elected Codell is doing the best job that they can. Your, your administration, CBJ, I don't know the best way to put this, CBJ is putting in a whole lot of work to really tell you a story, and that's kind of the place where, as a community, if you want to help, is helping the rest of the world, the rest of the nation understand your story, right? There's not another community in America that has a cloth. There are cloths in Alaska, but most of them aren't really impacting towns, impacting people's houses, right? They're in uninhabited valleys. You guys have a unique problem in the entire United States, and helping the Corps, helping CBJ tell your story is really a place where this community can help. So that people do understand that, hey, this is a big problem, and this is how we fix it.
Yeah, and to answer your question about the process with where does the cost benefit analysis come in? So we're doing this technical study now, we're gathering data, we're coming up with some ideas. And the idea is to start the study with all of the data we need. Maybe there's a few extra needs based on stuff we learn right now, but we can also eliminate some options from the jump that just absolutely won't work. And that could be because they're cost prohibitive for everyone. It just isn't feasible. Or just because it's not engineeringly feasible. So we do take affordability into consideration. And then when we do the study, the cost benefit analysis is done on each option that we present and analyze. So we have alternatives of different solutions within each alternative, and they can be organized in different ways to address different levels of risk. So the cost benefit analysis does take into consideration affordability, implementability, acceptability, effectiveness. And then, so by the time we pick one, ideally we've thought about all that stuff and everybody's on board with the solution. And if that means we find on different levels of risk with each alternative, the point is to get to the end of the recommendation with an implementable project. That's our number one goal with the feasibility study. And then that is a recommendation to Congress. And then we present the recommendation, and then we get the appropriation in a separate slug of money, usually in the process. And then that is when we start building the recommended plan. So it is multiple steps, but we are working to expedite it. And then we also work closely with our sponsor in the community to inform the cost benefit analysis to make sure everybody's concerns are represented in the alternative plans.
And in keeping with that, seeing as situations like the ESCO barriers were implemented in very quick succession with a fairly minimal amount of data presented, does the Army Corps have any intermediary measures that they can put in place that would be somewhat of a stopgap to alleviate, kind of the unique situation we have that is a guaranteed annual, potentially multi-annual event? Are there any mechanisms that they would be able to put something like HESCOs or phosphorus on the lake as a small stopgap measure, similar to what they've done with the Mendenhall River, with a massively unknown outcome in the long term?
It's a really good question. That's where we're going here. I don't know that a good medium-term solution, right? Long-term solutions, something permanent, something that's going to be there for our kids, for our grandkids, right? It needs to last, it needs to be there for the next 50 years type of solution. The HESCO baskets, they're a short-term flood fighting solution. They're not meant to be there forever. They're not meant to be a forever thing. They're a stopgap measure. I don't know if I really don't think we have a program or a way to do a in-between solution. One benefit, if you will, of the Corps is when we build long-term solutions, we're generally looking at the long term. We don't want to continuously build the same thing over and over and over again, because that generally is the more expensive way of going about it. solving problems. And I'm gonna go and then I'll get you, I'm sorry.
So you're looking for a long-term solution, and this one gentleman gave one with the dam, so. Can we say, okay, we have three long-term solutions. Why? We have the money for the studies. This solution looks feasible, let's study that and see. If that would be a solution. And study the second one, have three solutions and study each one to come up with the final solution, what to do long term. Instead of gathering all this data, then sort it all out rather than start with. This is the solution, this is the solution, and this is the solution, let's pull the data and see if that applies to this solution. Let's pull the data and see if it applies to this solution, and whatever is feasible and what works, that's a solution, and that's what we're going to do. And that's what we're going to present all our data, all our plans to Congress with the concrete evidence that the only solution to save lives, to save property, and you will get the funding. So I feel like we should start. What is the solution? We have three options, this, and this. Let's study, let's get the data to see if this solution works, get the data if this solution works. And then we'll come up with the answer.
I think that's maybe I misexplained the process. That's kind of the process we're going through, right? We want to look at all three of these solutions simultaneously. We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak.
I mean, we have to, or what, well, I mean, how many solutions do we have? I mean, do we have anything in mind that we're looking at and applying data that will work long term?
So we are kind of looking at that, sort of a retention basin, right? That would be a dam type solution. Looking at a potential levee, increased conveyance solution, bypass channels, levees, those sorts of things. It's to some extent, it's where you mitigate the risk. Do you mitigate the risk at the lake? Do you mitigate the risk in the river? Do you mitigate the risk at the source? And one of, the plan is one of those should show us most fruitful. You kind of want to evaluate all three of them at the same time. And have that data driven to look at them all rather than look at one, look at the next. If we can look at all three at the same time, hopefully we get to the final answer a whole lot quicker than going one at a time. I hope I answered your question.
Couple of questions. So first, process question, are you looking at or considering, trying to do any emergency exemptions of the NEPA process? And the second question has to do with, can you comment at all about the feasibility in terms of like a medium solution is dredge on the outlet of the lake, increase like
Yeah, so on the NEPA, we see exemptions, within that kind of 3-year study, we looked study timeline, 3 to 4 years. That includes generally full NEPA. Within the Alaska district, we've been really successful at utilizing EAs for our projects. One of the things we do in feasibility is complete NEPA. So you leave NEPA, you leave feasibility with 100% done NEPA. Historically, they haven't been barriers or hindrances to the timelines. It's just a thing we have to do as we go down the road. That being said, the NEPA process has been speeding up some over the past couple of years. So I guess at this time, there's no plan to look for an emergency exemption, because we don't really think that it's going to be the hold up. Regarding dredging out the mouth of the river, I'll take a stab at it. Mike, yell at me if I'm wrong. So if we start dredging it out, it doesn't retain water. It puts that water into the Mendenhall River just as fast as it would anyway. Even in some ways, it may exacerbate the problem because now the lake itself is attenuating and holding on to less water over time. And so dredging out or lowering the mouth of the Mendenhall, it may actually produce a worse outcome than leaving it alone, because you're gonna get that water through the lake even more efficiently, and push it down the river more efficiently, which ultimately raises the river height. You know, like, Mike can yell at me for a while, I think I got that one well.
Okay. Hi. Asphalt barriers. These asphalt barriers are gonna hold.
We're not here to talk about long-term solutions, or excuse me, about HESCOs. And if there's a team working specifically on the HESCOs, and it's not our place to speak for them on the HESCOs.
Well, I thought they came from that.
They did, but it's a different team, and that is part of the whole goal here, is getting as many people in our agency involved as possible. And so we have a team working on long-term solutions, and then we have a team working on short-term solutions. And that's the goal, to optimize it, is by breaking into different teams.
Both teams show up right before the flood.
You bring them to the lobby afterwards, for engineering and public works will be available for those questions.
So in case you didn't hear that, the city manager has reminded everyone that in the lobby after this, engineering and public works will be available to address HESCO questions. Thanks for the reminder.
I've got a HESCO question, sorry. Long term, short term, we're talking about long term here. I think we got a short term problem, it starts 8 days, 10 days or whatever it is. And because it went up 2 feet higher last year than they anticipated. This year it's anticipated to go 2 feet higher this time. And that gets us another couple of feet on our HESCO. I happen to have 4 in front of my house. We got neighbors who got 8 of them in front of their house. 8 feet, I mean. And so I'm just wondering what, if you're not working on, I understand that now. I'm sorry. I didn't know that you weren't looking on the whole thing. I listened to her, but it's been a long time. So anyway, I'm just wondering if that's, so if we come back to you in a year and say, oops, that baby's going over the top of those 4-foot HESCOs, we need something done now. And that's, I think, what we're looking for, is something that tells us if that's 24 million or whatever it is, water, then what is the answer to that thing? That river can be dredged, I believe. It can be widened in a lot of spots. It's got a lot of curves and didos and stuff in it now. And if you're not taking that into consideration now, then what is in play with it? So that's my questions. Thank you.
So like Blake talked about earlier, there's basically a few general options that then can be made more specific. There's the concept of passing the water out of suicide basins so that it does not build up water. There's the idea, the general alternative of a flood control dam to retain the water. And then there is the idea of passing the water more efficiently down the channel. So that is included in kind of that third category of alternative solutions that we are looking at, is how to more efficiently pass the water down the Mendenhall River. And that could be something like a levee or a flood control channel.
You mentioned projects up north where they're working on erosion, shoreline erosion. You mentioned the Stewart project, that's a tunnel issue, right? Are there any other projects in Alaska that are so much economic and life-threatening as what we're dealing with here? Are we at the top of the list for danger? As opposed to, if Seward's tunnel would be unpassable, I can imagine that would be a big inconvenience. But loss of life, I don't think compared to something like this, and shoreline erosion, those things move slow. We're dealing with something that moves really rapidly here.
Are there any other projects that the Army's working on? That have this danger level like we have here?
And this one's right up there. It's one of the more imminent threats that we have in the portfolio. You know, the tunnel and sewer, if it doesn't quite meet modern safety standards. If it was to fail, the thing immediately at the base of it is the hospital. You know, fairly catastrophic. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the more pressing, urgent, you know, it's top priority within our office is to get this thing moving, done, and keep pushing on it. That there are.
That's encouraging to hear. It's a top priority at your office.
So it is, you know, it is up there because it does have a very high life safety component to it.
My question follows up well to that. You mentioned that some of the projects that your organization works on, go through a different process than, the standard, and that's the just build it, you said, like sometimes they say just go build it. That sounded like a process that happens across the country or in some of your projects that we haven't really talked about, like how would we access the just go build it option? Is there like something you can do where you come up with a number and a plan that would be the just go build it option? And if our community was able to get congressional approval for that amount of money to just build it, would that be a separate project approach or process that is low likelihood but out there? Because I think Alaskans can get pretty creative and have influence at the federal level.
Alaskans are the most creative people around. No, so I mean, this kind of, the GI study process, right? Is really to, you know, like I said, that's. What does it end in? It ends in a recommendation to Congress. What is that recommendation? We're saying Congress, this is what we need to build to address this problem. Congress says, yep, go build it. You know, Congress doesn't, you know, Congress is Congress. They don't need the Corps of Engineers recommendation to do something. But as a federal agency, you know, obviously we don't have the ability to sort of dictate on Congress what they will do.
Again, for my question, for me, okay?
Yep.
Is there a way that the Army Corps of Engineers can say, you know, the gentleman talked about that dam over the lake, like that dam would cost $500 million, and here's what we would need to do it. And just being equipped with that knowledge as a community to try to pursue that type of like just build it option while you guys continue your standard process. I think that would be really important for our community, you know, like something like that.
As a federal agency, we follow the rules, we follow processes, right? Most of them are grounded in some sort of law. We're not doing them just because we like that, we're doing it because it's, you know, the process that has been laid out for us by some sort of federal law. Generally, without changing any law, we can create the process.
I think I would add to that your tool in this case is our non-viral sponsor. So I would say use them. They're powerful. They obviously have the ear, some powerful people. They understand your perspective, they understand the threat. Leif mentioned telling your story. That's something that y'all could definitely be doing, be loud, be annoying, communicated how dire the situation is. You have a very savvy sponsor. I keep saying that, but this is a really ideal situation for working with the Corps within our rigid boundaries. And again, like Leif said, the just build it avenue is not common, but I will say the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
I'm a fan of
gathering information everywhere. Are there countries around the world that have the same problem? And perhaps you could look at them to see what their successful outcome is in solving of their problem?
Yep, there's been, other countries obviously have these, like I kind of mentioned, Iceland has so many of these, they have a word for it. In Iceland, generally they have, either levee systems, or Iceland, like Alaska, is fairly unpopulated. And many of these have been going on for a long time, so the Icelandic people have chosen just to not inhabit those danger valleys. Switzerland, portions of the Alps, obviously glaciated, have these things. I know there's some tunnels in Switzerland that have been built. I don't know enough about the Swiss solutions to say anything intelligent about them. And I know these things happen in the Himalayas, Pakistan, India, potentially parts of China. Generally, I don't know that, and I guess I don't really know that much about what solutions they've tried to implement in Pakistan and India to say anything about that. Mike knows more.
Yeah, like they've said, these happen all over the world, and like our whole theme here, we're going to leverage what's happening all over the world as a way of advancing this as fast as possible. So we are absolutely looking at how these are managed in the rest of the world, and also how they evolve over time, because this is a relatively new law problem here, but these systems exist for a period of time, and so we're using these other analogs better understand how the suicide basin will evolve over time.
So I get the last question. I want to respect everyone's time and make sure that you guys have time to talk to our partners, CBJ Engineering, Red Cross, Clinket and Haida, National Weather Service, that'll be out there in the lobby. But if I may have the last question. We certainly in this room understand how influential and powerful our delegation is and their voice, because that's why we were able to get this technical study started. However, notwithstanding the kind of outside the normal process of funding that we acknowledge, you can't talk about how Congress can do whatever they want, but certainly we've seen our delegation do whatever we can. Do what's best for Alaska time and time again. Outside of that, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a technical study. We still need, as a sponsor and as a community, to secure funding for a general investigation study that then would trigger a recommendation to Congress for funding. And the reason why I want to have clarity in this, because everyone in this room wants to go home and take an action and support the next step, and kind of that's what I understand the next step to be. So if you could just help clarify that for me, and then I'll wrap up and promise you can go home.
Yeah, I'll kind of follow on to Katie's question here. So in order for the Corps of Engineers to make us the process we follow to make a recommendation to Congress to build something is that general investigations process. This technical study, it kickstarts that process. It gets us moving in the right direction immediately. We still would need that general investigations GI study to formally make a recommendation to Congress that this is the solution.
Thank you for helping clarify that, and just know that CBJ and Clinket and Haida will be working with the delegation on strategizing the build it now solution, the GI study solution, and engaging with you guys to get your support as we work on that next step, because we can't wait a couple of years for this study to happen to start advocating for that next step. So want to give the team here a tremendous thank you for taking the time to get to the process. I want to thank, I know we have a number of assembly members here too. I see Representative Story, I see Assembly Members Smith, Hall, Wall, and Kelly. Did I miss anybody out there? So thank you for our leaders for coming and listening to your public and engaging in this. don't forget that we have team members out there to answer your HESCO questions, your flood response, your emergency preparedness questions out there. And thank you all so much for your time and attention tonight.